Welcome back to the Red Web. This week we are talking about the different periods of historical ages of comic books. Of course, I've got Ms. Anastasia Anderson and Mr. Greg Burrow on loan from Dragon Slayer Comics and Fantasy here to help discuss the different comic book ages. If you caught our episode yesterday, you got the rough breakdown of the time periods, and we're going to start today with the Golden Age of comic books. Which pretty much has a lot to do with superheroes, but is not solely superheroes.
Yeah. So one of the big things here is when we're talking Golden Age, we're typically talking about 1938 to 1950. Now, there's a lot of overlap and a lot of discussion about exactly when the Golden Age ends and begins and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But typically, I want to say the Golden Age really kind of starts with Superman.
Yeah. And here's the thing to remember, where it ends is very vague because it doesn't really kind of end. This is the one period between when it comes from Golden Age to Silver Age where it's super vague because it kept going. Golden Age kept going when Silver Age started. So there's definitely some overlap. But 100%, Superman is the start of it. Now, the first thing we're going to talk about in Golden Age was the production of the materials. The main thing you got to understand with the business end of comic books is that they were printed on a newsprint type medium.
Yes.
And they were marketed as magazines, not books. Even though they call them comic books, they were not comic books, they were magazines. This is a very important distinction that they picked up from Pulp Fiction in that being sold under the guise of a magazine, they're allowed two business models that help them succeed. First of all, it was cheaper to distribute and produce. Because they were magazines, they were not taxed the same ways that, say, books and other literature would have been at the time, and they were easier to distribute because they could go out to more places with magazines and newspapers and stuff as that. But secondly, it also allowed them to market advertising space very much the way a magazine or a paper of that nature would be. So this is why you get all those little fun,
and that's also why they were so cheap, because of the fact that they were printed on cheap material and they were being paid for mainly by the advertisement.
Right.
So
the sales of the comic books themselves was just great.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
So that was a really cool thing. And also, just like Brad was saying, the size of the book was actually bigger than what we would consider a comic book today for the most part.
It would have been, more like a Life magazine, or magazine at the time.
Yep.
And it's very important to know that they had already started to get this model out there and selling pretty good with things like funny books. Is why they call them comic books. Is because before the invention of the superhero, it was mostly devoted to very rarely was there unique source material. The majority of the original Golden Age comic books were called comic books because they were reprints of Sunday strips of comics. They were actually collections. They would re-edit and collect Sunday newsprint. And so it was even cheaper to start off with because they didn't have to really pay that much for new artists and new writing and new such. So Golden Age of comic books really kicks off with, like Greg said, with the introduction of Superman in Action Comics in 1938, simply because it was a confluence of elements that lined up perfectly. You had this new model of this new product, the comic books, had just really started to saturate the market, and then all of a sudden we create a new genre, a new character archetype. And yes, we've talked about on the show before about how superheroes are influenced by Pulp Fiction and crime noir and things of that nature. We're just coming off the end of the Great Depression and even Prohibition and World War I. And so there was a lot of a need for this escapism stuff, but at the same time, there was a lot of sources for stories and content, and Superman and the creation of the superhero is what really took the most advantage of this new medium and also defined it at the same time.
I mean, he was mainly fighting mobsters and crooks,
Mobsters and crooks.
Then of course, Batman came along, and it was very much the same thing. where he was like a detective, a film noir style detective. He actually carried around a gun and shot people.
Well, it's really funny that we think of Superman as being the first superhero, but the reality is that there are many characters that were not super powered that were being published at the same time.
Yeah.
We just learned Spy Smasher when we were doing our Spy episode was in the he first appears in Action Comics alongside Superman.
Yeah.
So they were still writing these kind of characters. World War II heroes, flying aces were very popular. Yeah. The idea of espionage and stuff like that, started eating that. So definitely politics played a big part.
And there were some mature themes in some of these comics. I mean, like, for example, Hugo Strange, which a lot of people don't realize, Hugo Strange actually showed up way early in the Batman comics, the Detective Comics, because when Batman beat him, he actually burned the house down around him and waited outside to make sure that Hugo Strange burned down in the house. So that's kind of, that's pretty much, I'm pretty sure that's where Watchmen got that with Rorschach.
Oh, yeah.
Because he did that to Hugo Strange all the way back then. And there were a lot of things like that. And I think even the second issue that they introduced Catwoman.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So, second or third issue, they introduced Catwoman, and that was intended from the very beginning for them to be a romantic couple.
Yeah.
Right. Well, and it's like, and historically with stuff like war propaganda, there would, again, it wasn't a distinctly kids medium.
Correct.
This was it's for everybody. And in the war effort, everybody had a part to play.
Yeah.
So it's like, so on top of everybody having to do these emotionally exhausting wars, even in the meantime, they needed to have something that kept everybody's spirits going. Mm-hmm. Like if you all of the war propaganda of the time, you could this was a thing you could either send to the soldiers and they'd be super peppy about it, or this was something you could send home and market to the ladies working or the children that are just hanging out, and everybody can get on the same page with the war effort. Mm-hmm. So it's like, and so they sprinkled things like crime noir in there, but their main focus, at least during World War II time, is making sure that they were able to dispense this information as quickly as possible to as many people as possible. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So, I think the two, at least for me, the two biggest propaganda ones were Wonder Woman and Captain America.
Yep.
Yeah.
And those sold, and remember people who are didn't grow up in the comic culture, that Captain America was not always a Marvel Comics character.
No. As a matter of fact, three of the main, there were three big Marvel heroes that actually were, I count the Human Torch.
I count the Human Torch. I also count Namor.
Yeah.
But Vision, the original Vision was pre-Marvel. The original Angel was pre-Marvel. The original Black Widow was pre-Marvel, actually.
Oh.
Many may not know that there was a Golden Age, really, really bizarre, unrelated character named Black Widow, who's, I'm not kidding, she was a spy for the devil, and her real name was Clairvoyant. It was Clairvoyant.
And that was also a big thing about the Golden Age, is that they had horror comics. They had comics just about everything you could think of.
Cowboy westerns were very popular.
Yeah, westerns, the Lone Ranger. And then, of course, we're talking about, they even had Universal Monster comics. They had, comics that were direct, comic interpretations of movies, and just like today.
Yeah.
And television shows and things like that, or radio shows.
Right.
Dick Tracy.
But the really important thing to remember is the Golden Age started off without the hindrance of the Comics Code Authority.
Exactly.
Right. It wasn't a specific, this is for kids, these are the only 3 things you can talk about type of thing. This was basically as common as going to the movies.
Yes.
Yeah.
You have your own variety and much of what we were talking about on the age systems previously, where there wasn't a specifically marketed age group.
But the crazy thing is that for the most part, most of the comics that I've read from the Golden Age were very kid-friendly still.
Mm-hmm.
For the most part. I mean, obviously there were horror comics that
Yeah.
Well, and it's
And
like
then there were some other ones, but I mean,
there'd be some
like
Condor
Batman-
that I'd be like, eh.
yeah, Batman anyone could have picked up, as far as I'm concerned. Superman.
So Superman hits it off
Wonder Woman.
big.
Yeah.
Yes, Superman hits it off big, and is of course followed by many imitators.
We're going to talk about that?
Not the least of which is Captain Marvel.
Captain Marvel.
Captain Marvel, a.k.a. Shazam. For those of you who don't know, we mention this all the time because it's such a
Shazam! I love
thing.
Shazam.
His name was not originally Shazam. His name was originally
We
Captain
have to
Marvel.
say it for copyright reasons.
And Captain Marvel Jr., and even Miss Marvel became so much more popular than Superman. I mean, Captain Marvel got a movie serial first deal before Superman did, and outsold Superman. Captain Marvel Jr. was Elvis's favorite comic book that he read when he was enlisted. He would read Captain Marvel Jr. comic books.
Yep,
As a matter of fact, that's where
Soldiers love
Elvis's cape comes from.
Elvis's cape is. You have never noticed
that was still my favorite story. I never knew that.
That Shazam has a very similar cape to Elvis. It's because Elvis actually has Captain Marvel Jr.'s cape. He modeled his costume after Captain Marvel Jr.
It's so wild.
Is he like Captain Marvel Jr.? That's how much more popular Captain Marvel was than Superman. You also had other Batman-esque characters. Blue Beetle.
Well, you got to finish the story.
Blue Beetle sold.
You got to finish the story about Captain Marvel and what happened there.
Well, and hold on, I was getting to it. But then you also have Blue Beetle, who is more popular than Batman, and you get so many imitators that DC Comics finally decides that they're losing money because they have this hot thing and everybody's copying. So they actually sued Fawcett Comics to stop printing Captain Marvel and won. Now, this is a really important thing in comic books because this is the big nail that really trips them up heading into the end of the golden age of comic books. Because you have a number of things happening. You have their biggest competitors has to stop publication, and everybody else who has anything similar is afraid of getting sued, so they immediately stop publishing things. You have the Depression and the war sucking up resources, especially paper.
There was a paper shortage.
So there's huge paper shortages, so they had to cut back on just the materials, so they had all of a sudden you go from this boom golden age of all these characters trying to get a piece of this pie to they don't want to get sued, they don't have the materials to produce them, they don't have the distribution methods anymore to get them out there. And the biggest thing politically, of course, is seduction of the innocents for where them writes a book basically blaming all of the violence and deviant sexuality.
Well, I think we need to talk about that on the next episode.
Yeah, what year did that one come out?
Well, he's the one that led to the creation of the Comics Code Authority, and which was also what regulated what could be produced. It hindered creativity.
1954.
Yes.
So
we need to talk about that in the Silver Age.
Yeah.
So anyway,
we'll make our transition.
All this combination of things basically creates this huge pullback in the industry. It's no longer profitable. You don't have as many characters being created and made, and this is basically essentially the death of the Golden Age.
Yeah. So catch us on the Silver Age next episode, and we'll talk more about this. And you guys take care. Have fun.
All right. Bye.